Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Good afternoon, my friends, and thank you very much for coming here today. I remind you all that we welcome any passerbys to join our rally and to tell the world what really is going on in Ukraine. Sorry for that little gap. But before we go any further, let's start this rally as we always do, with the Ukrainian anthem. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть москалям!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть! Смерть! Смерть!
Not so long ago, there were a lot of memes coming out and circling around the internet about Antonio Guterres shaking hands with Lavrov. It's truly an unsightly picture to see, an unsightly video overall. We can all see it for ourselves. That is what happens when appeasers take hold. That is what happens when people don't understand what they're truly dealing with. To shake hands with a murderer, with somebody who might slit your throat in your sleep tomorrow, is not a sign of friendship, it's not a sign of civilization. It's a sign of stupidity. The Russians are laughing because in Europe, this is seen as sort of a good manners gesture. Oh, but we want to solve the situation peacefully. My friends, Russia refuses to solve the situation peacefully. And this situation will not be solved peacefully for as long as Russia keeps refusing that peaceful solution, refusing to remove their troops from Ukraine and uphold the treaties that they have violated in the past. That is what's separating us from peace, my friends. The desire of the Russian terrorist state to continue fighting, the desire of the Russian terrorist state to still go forward and expect to remain unpunished for all of their numerous crimes against the Ukrainian people and many other people all over the world. Because, my friends, as we have said so before and we say it again, Ukraine is only the beginning, or rather, it had begun even before Ukraine. But this escalation will only continue until Russia is stopped at last. We can't keep going on with these appeasers, with these apologists who are trying to negotiate with Russia, when Russia keeps betraying the word they make immediately after they make it. Let's make a little list about the most important treaties that Russia has violated. The Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world back then. The Russian-Ukraine Friendship Treaty, where Russia once again acknowledged Ukrainian borders and Ukrainian sovereignty. Then the war in 2014 began. Same exact situation as happened in Georgia in 2008. The world did not learn. The world did not care. Now we have the situation that we have. And even before this major escalation by the Russian terrorist regime, they had already betrayed both the Minsk agreements, where the Ukrainians were willing to compromise, were willing to give up some parts of their territories in exchange of peace. We were willing to do as such. Russia, not so much. They were not compromising anything. And they were not even happy with the compromise that the Ukrainians gave, because they betrayed that treaty immediately after it was made. Both of them, in fact. Both of the Minsk agreements were betrayed by Russia. One of them in particular was very interesting, because the Russians had a small advantage in the Battle of Debaltseve. So they continued to press their advantage, instead of actually upholding the treaty that had been signed just days before that. That is what we're dealing with, my friends. That is the kind of creature that Guterres decided to shake hands with. But of course, the apologists will say that it's just a handshake, that it's just a goodwill gesture. But not like the Russian goodwill gestures. No, the Russian goodwill gestures only happen when they are beaten on the battlefield. And afterwards, after they are powerless to continue to try to strive for victory, they claim that their defeat was no defeat at all. Their defeat was a mere goodwill gesture. That is what they truly wanted to do ever since the beginning. This is what they claimed when they failed at Kiev. This is what they claimed when they failed at Kharkiv and at Kherson. And they will continue to claim as such. Even after this war is lost by the Russians, they will continue to claim that actually somehow it was all according to plan ever since the beginning. But my friends, we have to be wiser than that. We have to be wiser than individuals who would believe in snake oil salesmen like Putin or Lavrov. We need to understand what truly is going on right now. That Ukraine is fighting for its life, whilst Russia is fighting for the wealth, for the pockets of their leaders, of their corrupt heads. As the saying goes, the fish rots from the head. And in Russia, we can smell the rotten head from here, honestly, my friends. So let's not forget about that. Prigozhin forgot about it. And he could not forget about it any other time after the first time. But my friends, the main point we are here to give for everybody who's passing by, for everybody who might watch this from their home, or from wherever you are, the main point is this. Russia has started this war. Russia has escalated this war. And the only way to stop this war is to stop Russia. Stop Russia, stop the war!
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 Seize Russian assets!
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 More sanctions on Russia!
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 That, my friends, is of utmost importance. Russia is running on fumes. The only reason why their banks have not collapsed is because they implemented full economic control, just like in the Soviet Union. But this, my friends, is a temporary solution, a short-term solution, not a long-term one. They narrowly avoided a bank run in Russia at the very beginning of this war, when the ruble's value collapsed. That, my friends, has to be achieved. for Russia to finally come to the negotiating table. We can't go to the negotiating table with the Russians once they hold the advantage. The unequivocal rule for these negotiations needs to be the full and complete retreat of Russian troops from Ukraine, and once again, the respect that Russia needs to give to the Ukrainian sovereignty. Of course, simply signing a paper with Russia is not enough. We've learned that lesson in the past. A contract signed with the Russians is not worth the paper on which it has been written. That is why we need further assurances. Ukraine needs to be part of the EU. Ukraine needs to be part of NATO. That, my friends, is the future. And that is the future that we should all strive for. Because that's the only way that we're going to finally put Russia in its place. There has been leaked plans. There have been all kinds of leaked plans coming out lately about invasions, future invasions that the Russians are planning in the Balkans, in the Baltic regions, everywhere. They're planning to first and foremost make a land corridor between old Königsberg, nowadays called Kaliningrad, and Belarus, because Belarus, as we all well know, unfortunately, is under Russian occupation. Because the people of Belarus, they protested. They didn't want to be with Russia. They wanted to be free. And yet, Russia responded in the only way that Russia can respond, with tanks flooding their capital. Same exact thing in Kazakhstan, when those people also wanted to protest against the pro-Russian puppet regime that they have in charge. The same thing can be said about Georgia. The Russians have put their puppet regimes all over the place, wherever they can. And if they can't control your government, they will try to attack you head on, as they have done with Ukraine. And this war will only get worse until we finally stop seeing it as a local engagement, as a local war that will not spread elsewhere. We need to see this war as it is, my friends. This is a global war, not a local one. Russia has proxies all over the world, same as Iran, same as North Korea. They are cooperating closely with each other. And the only thing that we can do to stop them is to finally act. We can't keep expecting them not to do bad things simply because they shouldn't, simply because we expect them to feel bad or we expect them to think of the consequences. Russia did not care about the consequences when they invaded Ukraine, because they had already tried the same thing before. We've heard this song and dance before, my friends. What the Russians did in Georgia, what the Russians did in Belarus and in Kazakhstan, what the Russians did in Ukraine in 2014. They were trying to escalate it once again. And the world was blind, because people have not been paying attention. But that time needs to end, my friends. At long last, we need to understand what we're dealing with here, because that's the only way for us to get out of this terrible situation, for us to achieve world peace at long last. But world peace cannot be achieved with mere kind words and platitudes. World peace needs to be achieved by enforcing it, by making sure that the terrorist regimes who are trying to take down the West do not get away with their crimes. What's the point of having good intentions if at the first sign of trouble, at the first sign of adversity, we collapse? If we can't enforce our rules, enforce our laws, what point is it in having them? That lesson, my friends, should have been learned before. And yet, unfortunately, we still have to step on the same rake again. We still have to listen to these apologists with pockets full of rubles who say we should negotiate with Russia. After so many failed negotiations, so many betrayed treaties, we should still negotiate with them. Funny that, isn't it? They always say what's best for Russia, but they never say what's best for us, what's best for the West, what's best for the world. Because Russia, my friends, it doesn't have the best intentions in mind. The only thing they want is to expand independently of the consequences. There is a saying in Russia, in fact, it goes like this: Russia has no borders. Now what does this mean? Does this mean that Russia wants an open border policy? No. What it really means is that Russia will continue to expand its borders until Russia is stopped. It means their borders are limitless. It means they lay claim for the whole world. And this piece of legislation passed not so long ago proves this, my friends. It proves this in its completion. For anyone who doesn't know yet, this piece of legislation implies that Russia has the right to annex any region that used to be part of the Russian Empire or of the Soviet Union. Because Russia has a claim to those places. Now, of course, if today Italy were to sign a similar treaty and say that any region part of the Roman Empire in the past is now part of Italy, people would laugh. Because obviously Italy would not do such a thing. Because that would be insane. But why is it that people continue to suspend their disbelief and continue to simply lay in wait for Russia's next insane move? Why is it that Russia gets to get away with this? No, my friends. It will not get away as long as we do what is necessary. And what's necessary is to help Ukraine win. Arm Ukraine as you promised.
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 Fighter jets for Ukraine.
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 Air defense 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 for Ukraine.
Those air defense systems have saved countless lives in Ukraine because Russia continues to attack the infrastructure, continues to attack peaceful citizens in Ukraine. They're not targeting only military targets, my friends. Nothing like that. They've always had in their military doctrine to attack the citizens, to break the spirit of the people they're fighting against. That is how Russia wages war. And this is what Guterres decides to shake his hands with. This is what we're being encouraged to negotiate with genocidal maniacs who want to continue to perpetrate their slaughter for as long as they are not stopped. That is why, my friends, we have to remember that the only thing that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing. That is why we're here. That is why we're doing something. And every single person on earth should understand that this war involves more than just Ukraine. Everybody has skin in this game because radiation knows no borders. And if Russia feels like it will get away with using nuclear weapons, it will use nuclear weapons, my friends. Because the real thing that could encourage Russia to use those weapons is not escalation. Russia has proved that it will simply fold if they feel like there's going to be consequences. It is the lack of those consequences, my friends, that could potentially encourage Russia to use nuclear weapons. If Ukraine was part of NATO, Russia would have never invaded. Russia's never invaded a NATO country, at least not yet. This is a test. If Russia feels like the West is toothless, if Russia feels like the free world has no will to fight, then Russia will continue in the same exact tactic that they've been doing up until now, my friends. That is why we must remind people of what's going on in Ukraine. That is why we must stay together. Because Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and there are many proxies, the many terrorist organizations they support, like Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis, and many others. All of these terrorist organizations, they are united. They're cooperating. Although they don't always like each other, but they are cooperating. Now how come the West still has traitors like Orban and Fico trying to put sticks in wheels and trying to get in the way of the progression of important legislation? Why are they part of the EU and of NATO if they hate the EU and NATO so much? Traitors, my friends, traitors. That is why we must remind the world that the only way to stop an aggressor is not to appease him, but to help the victim win. World, wake up!
World, wake up!
World, wake up!
World, wake up! World, wake up!
Russia is a terrorist state!
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 Stop Russia! Stop the war!
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 Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть! Смерть! Смерть!
And now, my friends, we will have a short musical break.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим героям тричі.
Слава! Слава! Слава!
We gather here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. for 2 hours, every Friday at 6 p.m. for 2 hours, and every Sunday at 3 p.m. for 2 hours. And we've been doing that since 2014, when Crimea was annexed. And back then, lots of people said, well, Russians will stop there. Now we hear the same thing. They're saying, well, if you give them the territories that they have occupied now, they will stop. Well, Russians, they never stop. You can't imagine how many Geneva Conventions have Russia broken. Even with their missiles. They are using Navy missiles to bomb cities. The Ha-22, KH-22 missile, since the 60s, they used it against warships. It's 5.8 tons rocket with 1 ton of, up to 1 ton of explosives. And where do they send it? They send it on Kharkiv, they send it on Kiev, they send it on Odessa, any big city in Ukraine. By Geneva Convention, low precision rockets and missiles can't be used against civilians. Well, for Russians, those Geneva Conventions mean nothing. The same way the Geneva Conventions and human rights mean nothing when they torture, simulate drowning, simulate execution, and torture Ukrainian prisoners of war, the soldiers that they captured, thousands of them. And Putin had admitted that he had kidnapped and aided for more than 19,000 of children to be forcefully removed. Again, another Geneva Convention, another human rights, kidnapping in a war zone children and illegal misplacement, another war crime and another war crime. He's the only big Western leader, the only world leader that has Hague had issued warrant for his arrest. Only for one reason, because he had admitted of stealing those children, kidnapping those children. He says it's orphans. Well, who created those orphans? When he bombed those occupied regions, One of those orphans, although he's an adult, one of our speakers here, Eugene, his mom got killed in Mariupol during one of those bombings, and now he doesn't have a mother. Only for one reason, because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Putin, stop the war.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And with their war crimes spreading from Africa to Syria to Ukraine, in the 90s it was Moldova, in 2008 it was Georgia. For those people who say this is a Ukrainian problem, no. Russia is the worst neighbor and the worst friend anyone can have. Look at who is supporting Russia: North Korea and Iran. North Korea and Iran. I think they are on the bottom of the list of anyone to go and see how things are there, how the human rights are there. So the North Korea providing now missiles to Russia to bomb civilians in Ukraine is the only sign that you need to see that sanctions are working. Half of Russian aviation is using for parts. They had more than a dozen emergencies only this year, more than 180 last year. They're saying everything is fine, but planes are falling, they have emergency landings, they are dismantling fridges to get some microchips, they're begging other countries, please can you buy them for us, because we need to kill more civilians in Ukraine. So how can we negotiate anything with a country when Medvedev says that no government in Ukraine is acceptable for Russia? And when Russia says many officials are saying that Ukraine doesn't exist, it shouldn't exist. Well, we exist, and we were oppressed during USSR era by Stalin, and guess who Putin quotes the most? The war criminal who oppressed Ukrainians before. But we will never bow again to Russia. We will never be part of Russia again. They are bombing our cities, we are bombing their army bases. We need to protect our sky and our civilians. This is the only thing that we need from the world, is to support us, to protect ourselves from an invasion, which Russia did. They started it very slowly in 2014, and on the 24th of February 2022, they crossed the border and they killed, destroyed, raped and looted. Killed, destroyed, raped and looted. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
And those sanctions are piling up. From 1st of January it was diamonds, so diamonds can't be cut anywhere in the world if they used to belong, regardless where Russia stole them. Now it's oil, and guess what? Even Greece, who used to help out with their crime syndicates, used to help out Russia to get what they need. Guess what? The liquid gas is being stored there, and they will be already running a pipeline, and the world can live without Russian resources. But world is in danger while Russia does what it does. It's not only Ukraine. When they destroy grain in Odessa last summer, and they bomb Odessa even until now, when they destroy grain, they were supposed to go to Africa. Is this a Ukrainian problem or the world problem? When they destroyed that Malaysian plane and killed 300 people, did they kill innocent international people or were they Ukrainian? They were not Ukrainians. But every day they kill civilians in Ukraine. Every single day. We target their warships. They target our schools. 3,500 schools have been partially or fully destroyed. Hospitals, churches. This is what they target. And at the same time, officials are saying it's a fake. We bombed, they said Ukraine bombed their own Novokakhovka Dam. We bomb our own schools. Well, this never happened before this invasion, and it will never happen again when Russia is defeated in this war. But for that, we need that air defense. For that, we need those F-16s, because self-defense is no offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is no offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
And for those skeptics who are scared and they say, oh, but Russia is threatening, if we help Ukraine, something bad will happen. They might attack someone, or they're going to use their nuclear weapons. Look at Finland. They joined NATO. Russia threatened them with imminent repercussions. How many months ago did Finland join NATO? Did anything happen to Finland? Absolutely nothing. Putin said it's unacceptable for NATO to expand anymore. Guess what happened after Finland joined NATO? The border with NATO and Russia has absolutely doubled. Russia did nothing. They said if Poland keep helping Ukraine, there will be repercussions. Nothing happened. Bluffing, lying, stealing, raping, looting. This is what Russia does. When you look at Ukraine, zero war crimes, zero wars, peaceful nation. No more there's no such thing as USSR 2.0. They want to expand. Look at what is going on in those small regions of Russia. They don't look Russian. They have their own language. But because they are so small, Russia can send soldiers there. Russia can help Belarus if there are elections. After elections, if the public is in turmoil and there's an uproar, public uproar, what do? Russians send armed police to Belarus. When in Syria they need to subdue the civilians, they need to kill civilians, Wagner comes over, kills those civilians, trains how to kill civilians, because I think no nation in the world with such a large population knows and has more experience in killing civilians as Russia does, because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 And if you look at Europe, every single big nation in Europe is increasing their defense budget only for one reason, because Russia is a threat. When even in Norway they said one of their, I think, head generals of their little army says, we have few years to prepare in case Russia will invade. He says, we have those few years. Ukraine didn't have that. They started those trainings. By the way, NATO started their training in borders now, in Latvia as well now. Biggest training since Cold War. For only one reason, because Russia is a threat. You can't negotiate with them, you can't sign a paper with them. They will get their way, either killing you at night, or attacking you while you're sleeping, or by killing civilians, or by bombing civilians. This is what Russia does. The war in Ukraine is not the first war for Russia since '91. Have a look at the list. The list is very long. Some places they came twice. Look at Georgia, 2008. Look at Moldova, 92. Look at how many wars they have waged. Have a look online about African Legion that will be activated this summer in 5 different African countries to replace Wagner, to get their way. And Putin last summer said that Wagner is fully funded, about $3 billion it costs for them to run their operation, to steal natural resources in African nations, to steal resources in Ukraine. They were running in occupied regions. The mercenaries and the Russian army had a competition who will get to the salt mines in Donetsk region first, because whoever goes there first calls dibs, and this is what they do. They've been doing it for many years, and last 2 years it's Ukraine, because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Putin, stop the war.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And recently, Girkin, one of the guys who Hague gave a life sentence for shooting down a civilian Malaysian plane with almost 300 people on board 10 years ago, he has a life sentence. But in Russia, it's an amazing country where the criminals get discounts. So his sentence in Russia is only 4 years. For what? For disobeying Putin and for doing what Putin doesn't like. So the world gives you a life sentence for killing 300 people, but in Russia he was a free person until last year. Until last year. So for 9 years, a person who was found guilty, and with no doubt he was one of the people who shot a rocket on a civilian plane. The whole world says, you are a killer. In Russia, you're a free person. Well, you think maybe that's because he was army propagandist and it's only one case. Well, more than 50,000 mercenaries from prisons in Russia that Putin let Prigozhin in last few years, and even before the invasion of Ukraine. He says that if you fight in Ukraine for 6 months, you're a free person, regardless of your criminal record. If you killed someone, if you killed multiple people, we want you in our army. Guess what you're gonna do in Ukraine? You're gonna be killing civilians. Guess what? 45,000 of those people can't kill anyone. They died in Ukraine. But more than 5,000 of those that came, guess what they are doing right now? Some of them are working in schools, some of them are working in the police. Yes, you heard me right. A criminal that killed Ukrainians for 6 months is now a police officer. But some of them, they love doing what they love so much. Guess what they do? They kill babies, they rape children, they kill more people, and they go back to prison. So clean slate for some people, especially if you're a Russian. For you, second chance is that I can kill again, but now with a clean slate. Now it can be with a police badge, and now it can be while I work in school. Before war in Ukraine, this person was facing 15, 20 plus years in prison, 6 months in Ukraine, he comes back. Many of them came back with no legs, with no arms, but now he's a free person, but he's a disabled person. And guess what? Only in Russia a criminal can become innocent for killing more civilians. So what Girkin did and his example is just something that we should have seen coming, because what was normal for Girkin since 2014 become now normal for any criminal. If you're a murderer, it's fine. In Russia, you're glorified and you can get a clean slate. And this can happen only because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And all this money that is now being spent on defense and will be spent in many years to come, the money that could be spent by building schools, hospitals, being spent on people, is being spent only for one reason, is to protect the world and Europe from a potential threat that they think Russia is. Well, for Ukrainians, it's not a potential threat, it's an actual threat. 40 million people put life on hold on 24th of February 2022. 16 million people crossed the border of European Union in 2022. And even the status, those countries that do help us, you get a temporarily protection status for 6 months. Do you have the phone in your pocket? How long is the contract on that phone? 18 months, 24 months. When you get a loan, how many months is that? When you get any kind of contract, even a gym contract, is for 12 months. For a Ukrainian, it's a temporarily protection status for 6 months. It may be renewed, it may not be renewed. So many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, mostly women and children, can't plan tomorrow because of Russia. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 And because of what Russia does, because of all the widows they create, because of all the children that they kill in Ukraine, many of those soldiers in Ukrainian army, they used to be civilians. One of them is my cousin Serhiy, who is waiting for his weapon, and he says to me, we daily need to write reports, but I haven't received my bulletproof vest yet, and I haven't received my weapon yet, but every day we write report. The other day I spoke to him and he said to me, I'm very sorry, I can't talk. We need to deal with someone who has suicidal thoughts. So this is what my cousin is dealing with. An engineer, father of 2, he has a little daughter that is only a few years old, and a son few years older, who never held a gun in his hand. In September last year he was called. He says, I am ready because I don't want my children to grow up in Russia. Russia is not a very nice place to be in. Imagine what you saw on the news, them freezing. You only see that now because now those regions so much money is being spent on even oil last year, so much oil, because it's so much better to sell oil. It's so much more lucrative to sell oil abroad than to give to your own farmers. So they will say, wait, we can't collect crops because the tractors, they need diesel, but you sold it abroad. No, it's just being misplaced. Don't worry about it. You're freezing now. Well, we'll put few people in jail. It's not because we haven't changed pipes since USSR. We love living in USSR. So all that they want to drag to Ukraine. All that. Some of the Russian generals are saying it will be rubble or ours. Rubble or ours. Can you imagine negotiating with someone who thinks they're a superior nation, yet more than 40% of Russians don't know what is sewage and what is running water? Third of them go outside to the toilets. Every 11th school in Russia has a toilet outside. So guess what they did? They decided to destroy 3,500 schools in Ukraine. Maybe they were just targeting our toilets because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
And because of all the atrocities that they have committed, for every single civilian and soldier that they have slaughtered, especially the civilians, because even our army is mostly made of civilians who was called to protect our peace and freedom. This is why every single war rally we take a minute to honor those who've been slaughtered, killed. Some of them, for some of them it was children whose first breath was their last because they were unfortunate to be born in Ukraine during this invasion. They were unfortunate to be born on a day when Russia decided that bombing a hotel and hospital and school is normal thing. That's just Tuesday for them. But for us, every single civilian, every single Ukrainian is a personal loss because it's part of our country and it's part of us. And this is why it's so close to our heart. And this is why every single war rally we take 1 minute to honor the lives of those who will never see our victory, but they saw only the war, the beginning of the war. Thank you so much. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україні!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим героям тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
And this is why we gather here. This is why it's so important for us. Because me personally, in 2022 came summer, I had no hope. I thought we are facing an enemy so much larger than us. There is no way we can withstand. Guess what? It's 2024 and last year they've only went forward only by 500 square kilometers. Those who know geography, or you can look it up, because Ukraine is one of the largest European countries by size. If last year for Ukraine was a bad year and it was such a good year for Russia, guess how many years it will take Russia to take over Ukraine with the same speed they did last year? More than 1,000 years. This is how long it will take them to get to Lviv and get to the Polish border. So if you think that last year was such a bad year, that 10 times more artillery flown from Russia to Ukraine, 10 times more, and yet they go forward and they go backwards. They make 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Only for one reason. Because Ukraine has something to fight for. We fight for freedom and peace. Freedom and peace. For many Russians it's a paycheck. Lots of people say, I have some debts, I'm gonna go to Ukraine, I'm gonna just go there for like a year. I hope I don't kill some Ukrainians, but if I will, well, I'm a soldier of a Russian army. And then they have this dream that they're gonna make lots of money because they went to Ukraine, and any Russian soldier that we catch, oh, I didn't want to kill any Ukrainians. No. I just pressed the button for the rocket to go and kill civilians and bomb schools. I just pressed that artillery button. I just rode that tank. I just fixed that tank. That tank, no, I didn't kill. That tank killed people. I didn't kill anyone. Well, guess what? When Russians cross the European border, they are faced with reality and consequences of actions of their government. They can run away, hundreds of thousands can run away to Georgia that they attacked in 2008. They can go to Kazakhstan, the nation that they ridicule, and now there's a big political uproar. What do you mean in Kazakhstan there will be no education in Russia, there will be no this, no that? Or what do you mean you need to speak the local language? For Russians it's very mind-boggling. Why should you speak English in England? Why should you speak Latvian in Latvia? Guess what? This month there will be almost 900 plus, I think it was 940 Russian-speaking people that will be deported from Latvia. They say, oh, they are old people. They are 80 years old, they are 70 years old. They can't speak language. Well, yes. How about 1991 and onwards? They were in their 40s when they started to be people who lived in Latvia. They were in their 40s. Oh, well, they're in their 70s now. I know how the time works. But they were incentivized not to learn the local language. Ironically, one of the reasons why they attack Ukraine is because they don't want Ukrainians to oppress Russian speaking. No one in the world is oppressing Russian speaking. When they go to Kazakhstan, Belarus, Georgia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, they demand us to speak their language. How is that an oppression of their right if they are visiting our country? If you don't want to speak the language of a country that you live in, then leave. Then leave the country. In 1944, the same in 2022. What Stalin did in Lviv, Putin is doing it in occupied regions. They bring Russian teachers with new Russian books and they teach new Russian history. Guess what it says in a Russian history book that they just printed 2022 or 23? It says that Putin saved the world by attacking Ukraine. A nation that never attacked a single neighbor. A peaceful nation that Europe refers to as the breadbasket of Europe. They attacked Ukraine to save the world. So with that logic, they destroy up to 60,000 tons of grain in Odessa in a single day to save Africa from starvation. With their logic, it makes total sense. With anyone else's logic, it does not make any sense. Guess what happens when Russia gets its way? It never stops. Destroying, stealing, lying, looting, raping. This is what they did in Georgia and in other countries. This is what they are doing now in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger. They are activating local militia, they are training them, and it will be called African Legion. It will replace Wagner, because Wagner is being absolutely dismantled. This is a world problem. If you don't know about it, it doesn't mean that it's not happening today and tomorrow, because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Putin, stop Putin, stop the war.
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 More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
More sanctions on Russia.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
We're gonna listen to some beautiful Ukrainian music and we're gonna continue. Thank you so much.
Слава нації! Україна!
Понад усе.
Україна!
Понад усе.
Україна!
Понад усе.
Героям України тричі!
Слава, слава, слава.
A few days ago, we've had news about a certain plane that was shot down near the Ukrainian border. A Russian plane. Now, the Russians claim that that plane had supposedly Ukrainian prisoners within. Now, I would like to invite every single person here to take that with a grain of salt. Not only because Russia is an untrustworthy entity, and any information that they give to anyone should be taken with, honestly, a mountain of salt, to be honest. But also because the Russians have done similar provocations in the past. In fact, the Russians have destroyed the Olenivka prison, killing hundreds, perhaps thousands of Ukrainian prisoners, Azov-style defenders, brave men and women who were fighting for the freedom of Ukraine. The Russians decided to execute all of those prisoners whilst trying the thinnest veil possible to hide those crimes. Let's not forget about that. The Russians will lie, cheat, and deceive with no end to their lies, so that they can get away with those crimes that they have committed so many times in the past and continue to commit now. None of us knows whether or not there were prisoners in that plane. But one thing is certain, that Russia will play dirty, and they will play in whatever way they can get away with, until they are finally stopped. If there were prisoners in that plane, then our mourning goes for them also. But if there weren't, then be prepared, because very likely Russia is getting ready to execute more prisoners, to commit more crimes, and then blame the Ukrainians of doing so, as they always did in the past, as they've done in Donbass for so many years. It became a meme, truly. It became a meme that the Russians would keep saying, "Dombili Donbass," that the Ukrainians were supposedly attacking the poor, innocent, prosecuted people of Donbass. Well, who started this war? Who came there with weapons? Who annexed regions of a peaceful country? A country that demilitarized the vast majority of all of their weapons. A country that gave up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world back then. Who did all of this? Was it the Ukrainians? No, my friends. It was always the Russians. Every single step of the way it was the Russians. And they always blame the Ukrainians of doing the things that they have done themselves. This was even done during the Soviet Union, when they would dress themselves as UPA, the Ukrainian rebellious army, and they would start attacking people to try to blame it on the Ukrainian rebels. They still do it nowadays. These Soviet tactics, these dirty tactics, they don't just leave your system like that without major, and I mean major reforms in the country. And Russia has not had major reforms. Russia used to be ruled by criminals, Russia is ruled by criminals, and Russia will continue to be ruled by criminals until Russia is reformed at last. And for all of those brave warriors who are being held in captivity, being tortured, being murdered by the Russians, I ask you, my friends, to always remember them, so that their sacrifice will never be in vain. Free Azov-style defenders!
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 Russia is a terrorist state!
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 World, wake up!
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 It is indeed necessary for every single person who's still sleeping on this situation to wake up at last. It could be a rude awakening to see the Russians within your country already perpetrating another special military operation, another denazification, with world-famous neo-Nazi groups like the Wagner Group. Of course, who better to denazify than the Nazis themselves? Makes sense, doesn't it? Well, it really doesn't. But in Putin's head, and in the heads of those who follow his propaganda, somehow it does. Indeed, my friends, Prigozhin himself has said so many times, and that is why he got killed in the end, not because of the war crimes, but because of him telling the truth about the Russian terrorist regime. He said so himself, that the Wagner Group had been fighting the Ukrainians for years, and they still couldn't find these imaginary Nazis. I guess Prigozhin should have looked in the mirror. He would have had an easier time of finding the real Nazis in that situation. But my friends, we need to continue to speak this truth to everybody around the world, because people unfortunately still don't know. It hurts me personally to see our American friends fighting each other, arguing with each other in uncertainty whether or not they should be helping Ukraine, whilst Russia is already planning their next invasion, whilst Russia is passing legislation to annex American land. Because for those who don't know, Alaska used to be part of the Russian Empire long ago. And this piece of legislation is unbelievably controversial. The piece of legislation states as such that Russia has the right to take whatever lands were part of the Soviet Union or of the Russian Empire in the past. Pure insanity. And yet, some apologists, some of these peaceniks, as they like to call themselves, they claim that we should negotiate with Russia. They claim that we should ask Russia nicely, and then Russia will do what we ask them to do. Then they will behave like people, and not like genocidal maniacs. Well, my friends, we've asked, they've answered, and they betrayed their word. To continue to ask, to answer, and to take with the betrayals that they're giving us over and over and over again is to be insane. Because as you all well know, The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again whilst expecting a different result. And we must not expect a different result if our action is the same. We must not continue to expect the Russians to keep their word. We have to force them to keep their word at last. It has been too long since the world understood what Russia is. During the Soviet Union, during the Cold War, the West knew what the Soviet Union was, and that's why the West opposed it. But after its collapse, there was this false hope that Russia had changed its ways, that Russia had become different, better. Just like Germany, just like Japan, who used to have the same kind of genocidal maniacs that sit in Kremlin right now, ruling them. And yet look at them now. Look at Germany, look at Japan. Pinnacles, true pinnacles of freedom, pinnacles of progress and of prosperity. Two of the biggest economies in the world. And now look at Russia, the biggest country in the world, perhaps the most resource-rich country in the world. And their people live like slaves, like bums, like homeless. In the country with the most resources in the world. Why is that? And why is it that instead of giving them a better quality of life, Putin decides to invade other countries in the periphery? Why is that more important? Well, my friends, it's because the Russian people have lost their word. Some of them gave it up willingly, others unwillingly. But some still oppose the Russian terrorist regime. And I think we should pay our respect for those brave Russian men and women who oppose the Russian terrorist regime. Vast majority of whom has gone to jail. Vast majority of them have either died or been prosecuted. Some of them even fight for Ukraine in this war right now as we speak. The Russian Liberation Army is one of them. They have a lovely flag that one day I hope will be the new flag of Russia. A white stripe, a blue stripe, and another white stripe. You could say that they have cleaned up the blood from the Russian flag. Now the truth of the matter is, my friends, that blood can never be cleaned up. The people who died cannot be brought back. The damage that has been done cannot be undone. But we can and will move forward. But for that, we need the cooperation, the full cooperation of the Russian people. Not as this slave entity who's going to follow Putin to the grave, but as a people who want to have a future. Because the current defeat and full collapse of the current Russian regime is in the benefit of the Russian people also. They're being used as meat, and some of them seem to like it. That's the really dangerous part. I'd like to mention something. A certain video that has been becoming more and more famous lately. It's a video of a lovely British gentleman who's been playing the piano in a tube station, I believe. And there's been a bunch of CCP individuals with Chinese flags who came to him and demanded him to stop filming them, demanded him to delete the video, demanded him to never post any images of them. They called it their image rights. To which the individual answered, the British gentleman answered, that here in Great Britain, we don't have Chinese laws, we don't have communist laws. So those rules don't apply. But those individuals, they did not want to hear it. And that, my friends, that is the same shamelessness that the Russian terrorist regime continues to use on everybody. There's a little joke among the Ukrainians in Portugal. You know, maybe my friend Rui here knows this joke. This is a good one. That a Russian woman and a Ukrainian woman go to a cafe in Portugal. And the waiter comes to them. He asks in Portuguese what they want to ask for. The Ukrainian lady, she speaks with slightly broken Portuguese, but fair enough. The man understands her. He takes notes and he goes to the Russian lady. The Russian lady speaks with plain Russian her order. The waiter looks at her funny and says, "Sorry, I don't understand, I don't speak Russian." The lady sighs and then says, with an even more broken Portuguese, what she wants to order. The waiter writes down and leaves. And the Russian lady turns to the Ukrainian lady and tells her, "I've been living here for 10 years and he still doesn't understand me." Now this, my friends, this is reality. Unfortunately, the Russian terrorist regime loves to weaponize their language, loves to weaponize their culture, and above all, loves to weaponize their people themselves. For every country in the world that has a Russian minority, you should consider what your choices in the future might be. Because one beautiful day, Russia might just decide that you're a little bit too much of a neo-Nazi for their liking. And by the way, the Russian definition of what it means to be a neo-Nazi is anybody who does not do exactly what they want them to do. If you don't fall in that category, you're a neo-Nazi. It's as simple as that. Now, some individuals would claim that that's not a fair assessment from the part of the Russians. But what does their opinion matter? Because Russia is still not being held responsible. Russia is still doing what it wants to do. And until that time ends, until the time that Russia will be held responsible for their crimes comes, they will continue to do as such. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 More sanctions on Russia.
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 Seize Russian assets.
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 Personally, my friends, I've faced our opposition head-on many times, and same with many other people here in our rally. Many of you, my friends, you've come to our counter-rallies, counter-protesters, to those who have opposed us, to face off against them, to stop them from spreading their misinformation. That is unbelievably important. For that I say thank you to all of you who came here today, to all of you who came to these events. And we should continue to do as such, because these actions have a very deep meaning. If we simply allow these shameless individuals to act as they please in public and get away with it, they will feel the same way that the Russian terrorist regime still feels nowadays. They will feel like there is no accountability to their actions, no consequence. And if that's the case, well, then any crime is fair game. Let's imagine for a second that rape, murder, and theft would stop being criminal acts, and there would be no consequence for any person or people who want to commit them. How would society work that way, my friends? Now the question follows. How are you supposed to deal with a country like Russia who continues to commit these crimes and fully get away with them, whilst in fact some people are openly encouraging us to give them concessions? So let's get this straight. They commit the crimes, they do the damage, and we give them concessions to make sure that they don't do it again? Is that really the detriment that our free world has for all of these terrorist regimes in the world? Is that really going to stop them? That if they commit those crimes, we give them a little extra to make sure that they're appeased? Ingenious, truly. I've never heard logic so good in the past, even in Speaker's Corner. Although then again, Speaker's Corner has fallen quite hard, I have to admit, my friends. I've seen videos in the past of people debating about deep, intrinsically interesting topics in Speaker's Corner. Whilst nowadays, well, they just shout at each other. About religion, about politics, whatever. Different things. But I digress, my friends. Speaker's Corner has been a very useful place. And I would invite any person who wants to get some experience in speaking to go there also. To go there and to try for yourself. Because once again, in Speaker's Corner, the bar is set pretty low. So you don't have to be sad, you don't have to be upset if you make a mistake or if somebody takes the upper hand in the debate. It's a pretty lowbrow place, so I would really encourage you guys to come there. But even without that, I encourage every single one of you, my friends, to continue to speak, whether it be here or wherever you are. At home, at work, everywhere. Our message needs to be spread by all means possible. And that is why the only ones who can actually do it, the only ones who can actually spread it, is us. That is the action that we have to do. Stop Putin, stop the war!
Stop Putin, stop the war!
Help Ukraine, protect peace!
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 And now, my friends, we will have another musical break. Enjoy.
Україна, Україна, Україна. І нашим героям тричі.
Слава! Слава! Слава!
And this is why we gather here, and this is why it's so important for us. Not only because Russia is so despicable and what they do in so many countries, because now it came to our home. For me personally, it came to my family. There's a mother and daughter that usually stands here on my right side. Their father was on the front line for more than a year. One of the girls who also stands over there, she's not here today. Her brother is on the front line. The couple who stands here, their son-in-law was on the front line for more than a year, demining the front line where Russians leave mines. And now the most fertile land in the world, Ukrainian land, this is why they nickname Ukraine the breadbasket of Europe, is the most hazardous, no other land, no other country in the world has more mines than Ukraine right now. Just with Belarusian border, there's more than 500,000 of mines, because we are scared that they can attack us again from the Belarusian side. And this is why we have our Belarusian friends standing with us as well here, because Russia is a problem for them. Many Belarusians are fighting on Ukrainian side. Many Russians are fighting on the Ukrainian side, because we are fighting for peace and freedom. Peace and freedom. There's not a big list of regions that we want from Russia. We don't want any land. We just want 19,500 children that they kidnapped. The other day, I saw a video this week, 4 children were returned. Another 19,496 still left that they misplaced, put them in another families. Guess what destiny awaits those kidnapped Ukrainian children? In less than 10 years, if they attack another country, guess who will receive a letter to fight against Georgia, against any other country? The flag and the country does not matter. The theme is war, the destination is pending. Whoever they need to attack. It can be somewhere in Africa, it can be somewhere in Syria, it does not matter. Russia is a global problem. What they do is a war crime. It is official, and only for one reason. They've been like that during USSR, and they are like this now. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 And what they do and how they do it does not change in last 100 years. Can you imagine? 90 years ago, in 1932 and 33, Stalin created Golodomor, the USSR created man-made starvation. Estimates are 4+ million killed because they stole the grain that Ukrainians had gathered. The couples too who stands here, their daughter a few weeks ago, she said, my grandma said that we collected crops, but it was taken away. So they were hiding the crops they collect from their own fields, and they were starved to death. 2023, they bomb and they destroy what they couldn't steal in Ukraine. 60,000 tons of grain in one day was destroyed in Odessa last summer. What do? 2 weeks after, they start bombing ports in Odessa and destroying grain. They have the audacity to invite African leaders. How about you lift sanctions? 1932, they steal the grain. 2023, they destroy what they can't steal. Nothing changes with Russia. They attack smaller countries like Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine. Everywhere there is a civil dispute and there is any kind of gain, like in Africa, like they do in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, you name it. If there is any diamond mines or any resources they can steal, Wagner is there, the other mercenaries is there, and they are not hiding it. Last summer, Putin, yes, we found Wagner. Yes, we steal children. Yes, they have issued a warrant for his arrest. Yes, they are war criminals. But anyway, so many people are skeptical. Well, just give them few regions. The same people said the same about Crimea. We will give them some sanctions. They wanted Crimea, they took Crimea, they will stop. They did not stop. Because terrorists, it's not a part-time thing. It's a full-time job, it's a calling. If you're a war criminal, this is what you do. So for you to stop, you need to be put in prison. In Russia, the criminal system does not work. If you commit a war crime, you've been glorified. This is what we're dealing with. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 More sanctions on Russia.
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 No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
And for the world to understand that if Ukraine loses this war, if Ukraine falls, there will be no more Ukraine. They will be on the borders with Poland, and already Putin said that if Poland needs to be reminded who gave them, direct quote, who gave them Western Poland, Stalin did. Putin will remind them personally. Guess who attacked Poland on the same side with the Nazis in 1939? Stalin. So he gave to Polish people what he took from them. Well, the definition of theft is permanently depriving someone of something with no intention to return it. This is how Kaliningrad was made, was Königsberg. All Germans were sent away. The Austrians were sent away. Every time the history repeats itself. Well, it's Russians. Well, it's war crime and it should be stopped. Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And because of Russia, so many millions and millions of people, you can't plan your education. You can't plan your life. You don't know if your husband, your brother, or your friend will be called to the army to defend yourself from Russian invasion. No one attacked Russia. Every single premise they use, the regions they occupy, they need it because of natural resources. Same thing in Africa. In Belarus, they need Lukashenko to be there. This is why they will help him to stay there. And this is why Lukashenko will help Putin to attack Ukraine from Belarusians, and he's using Belarusian people as hostages. I think one of the longest dictators in the world is not Putin, because Lukashenko was there before him. North Korea, another dictator. Russia, another dictator. 3 colluding to kill civilians in Ukraine. Time after time, more than 700 days now, that Ukrainians have their lives on hold and their lives in danger because they bomb cities. We bomb army bases. We bomb their fleet. By the way, the Black Sea Fleet is 20% lighter now. They said, oh, in Novorossiysk, there is no way that Russian fleet can fit in, the Navy can fit in from Crimea to Novorossiysk. Well, every single day, Ukrainian army is trying to help them to reduce by size, so it will be easier for them to fit in any port in the world by the time this war is finished. But we need that air defense just to protect ourselves. We need those F-16s just to protect ourselves, because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Help Ukraine protect peace.
Help Ukraine protect peace.
And if Ukraine wins, then Belarusians win. Then Russians win. They will finally get that sewage. They will finally get that gas that is stolen or sold, that so many Russians don't know. What do you mean central gas? What do you mean you can have gas without those big containers, the red containers that I used to see in the beginning of 90s in Ukraine, that you need to, a truck brings you gas, you connect it to your cooker and you cook. That was in the 90s. In a small village in Khmelnytsky region where I visited my grandma. Well, in Russia in 2024, it's the same. Someone brings that big gallon of gas, you cook, and some places don't have sewage, and it's fine. We will use that ditch over there to just put our excrements there. Well, in winter it doesn't smell because it freezes. This is normal for Russia. This is not normal for anyone else. Any different sexuality, they are banning religions. They are trying to, now they are considering to ban abortions. Guess why? Not because they are so holy and so religious, no. Because if you don't reduce abortion rates, who gonna be in their army in 18 years? The abortion today for Russia means one less soldier to fight somewhere for them, to kill civilians for them in 18 years. They are planning ahead. And this is why Russia needs to be stopped. This is why Ukraine just wants to stay free and have peace on their own land. For us, this is not just a land. This is our legacy. This is our culture. This is where we were born, and this is where we want to live. They want to negotiate right now, but they are not offering anything apart from we keep what we want and we'll attack you again when you're sleeping. It can be in 5 years, it can be in 10 years, like they did in Crimea, and they said, no, we were not there. It was some friendly people. They call them friendly people wearing army clothes. And then a year later or 2 years later, Putin says, yes, it was us. It was us. Wagner, Putin says, Wagner is nothing to do with Russian government. He says it to Macron's face. He looks him here in the eye and he says, it's nothing to do with us. Prigozhin marches on Moscow last year. Putin goes on television. Wagner is fully funded by Russian government. How can you trust a criminal who has a warrant for his arrest for kidnapping children, not even adults? Children. He's kidnapping children. War criminals. Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
No Russia at Olympics.
No Russia at Olympics.
No Russia at Olympics.
No Russia at Olympics.
How can any professional athlete be a neutral athlete if they have a sport government army club? And most of the Olympians, last Olympic Games, more than 300 medals in Russia were won by people associated with army, Russian army sports club. How can someone be neutral and say, well, but my career is going down the line. I need to compete. I need to win medals because I've been trained to do this kind of sport. Well, 40 millions of Ukrainians want to live in peace. This is not fair. Sanctions are fair because it's a consequence of war crimes. Sanctions are normal, but they say, oh, we will avoid them, we'll just pay double. I'll get my iPhone 15 Pro Max. Guess what? They go to Finland at the border, they say, where did you get that phone? Well, I just bought it from someone, I paid double. Sanctions are evaded. No, they said if you can't buy it because of the sanctions, it's illogical for you to travel into reality, which is European Union. And they get offended. What do you mean I can't drive my car? Because you can't buy it because of the sanctions. But crime is legal in my country. Well, it's not legal everywhere else. And they meet reality when they cross the border. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим героям тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
I would like to thank, before we sing our beautiful national anthem, I would like to thank every single person who comes here. Will it be freezing weather like now, cold weather like now, rain or sunshine, does not matter. This is very important. I met friends for life at these rallies, and they changed, they gave me hope, and their experience and their wisdom gave me hope, and this is why we are here. Because we have hope that Ukraine will stay free. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your support. This is so important, you can't imagine. I will just remind that our rallies are here at this spot at 6 o'clock, at 6 p.m. every Wednesday and Friday for 2 hours, and at 3 p.m. on Sunday for 2 hours. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
And as always, we're going to finish our war rally with our beautiful Ukrainian anthem. Thank you for your support.
України, ні слава.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть москалям!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим славним захисникам і захисницям тричі! Слава! 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 Дякую!